Hi, I'm Austin Wintory, and this is the Game Maker's Notebook. Today I'm talking with Finishing Move, aka the Bryans, Brian Lee White and Brian Trifon, who as a duo have recently worked on Doom the Dark Ages. So, of course, we unpack that and get all kinds of pearls of wisdom and get to hear their insights into scoring this with a very kind of old school thrasher metal quality, which was totally delightful and fascinating to listen to. And of course, leading up to that discussion about Doom, they walked me through their individual histories and rather inauspicious beginnings into the world of game music and game audio, how they became a partnership, and how they tag team and work together today. So, a really wonderful chat with two lovely guys and two big talents in the world of game music. So, I hope you enjoy.
The Slayer has been activated.
I can never rule as king, so long as you are the only one they fear.
The Bryans, the notorious Bryans. How are you
Infamous.
guys? Yes,
Good.
deeply
Great.
infamous.
Good.
Stoked to be doing this with you guys. I was trying to remember when we did. I think the first time that we met, unless I'm forgetting, was at the Game Sound Con where we were on a panel together, which feels like approximately 6,000 years ago.
Yeah.
But
what
I
was that?
don't.
Like
Pre-pandemic.
2018?
It was before they moved it to Burbank because it was at the hotel, the Millennium Biltmore in downtown LA, which definitely puts like at least 4 or 5 years ago mark on it. But I don't think we had met. Am I forgetting? Like maybe been passing at GDC or something. But I feel like that was the first time I ever got a chance to hang with you guys, and certainly the first chance I got to kind of hear your thoughts on all this stuff.
Yeah. I think maybe, we were at GDCs prior to that, but I don't think we'd actually, spent time chit-chatting before that. So
Yeah, okay.
that was the one, I think.
I think so too. Well, you guys are someone who I had our mutual friend of Christopher Melroth is someone who was always excited to sing your praises. So I it's one of those kind of parasocial things where I felt like I knew you better than I actually did because I would regularly hear such nice things. But here's where we're going to get it all blown out into the open.
Right.
I'll ask all the questions that I actually don't know the answer to. I haven't had occasion to really get from you. So um, I tend to kick this off, even though it's perhaps slightly clinical. I nonetheless am always interested to know kind of where all this began. Individually, your inroads into being musicians, composers, producers. I have all kinds of questions about the dynamic of a partnership, which remains this fascinating, sort of inexplicable thing. But obviously, I'm assuming you had independent paths that led to that. So I'd love to,
Sure.
pick whoever wants to kick it off. But then, yeah, I'd love to kind of know that road.
Yeah. So I'll start. I guess, for me, the journey with music really, embarrassingly enough, I feel like it started with hearing Metallica on the radio as like a 10-year-old and just being
What's
like,
supposed to be embarrassing about that? That's like
I
the
don't know.
Beatles being your inroad. It's like, okay, just
I,
pick one of the best great groups of all time.
I think it was, but it was because, okay, so if you're like, really into Metallica or metal, the first thing I heard was the Black Album. And that's sort of the peak of what people consider when they started to sell out and not be cool anymore. But that was, anyway, for me, that was my introduction to like Metallica and to just really falling in love with music. And I heard that, and at that time, like my ear wasn't developed at all, and it just sounded like a block of sound. I didn't understand the separation of like guitars and bass and what's what, but just that heavy chugging sound. I was like, I need to do that, whatever that is. I want
How
to
old
be a
did you
part
say
of
you
that.
were?
I was probably like 10 or 11.
All right.
Yeah, and so this is probably 1991, 92, that around then. And so, yeah, at that around that age, I begged my parents. They rented me an electric guitar. I started taking lessons. I was not very good,
You
but
still
I was
maintaining
very,
the payments on that rental today?
yeah, exactly.
Good. Kept
and
up with it.
and yeah, but I took it really seriously. I was determined. And so I ended up, I kind of fell in love with guitar, took it really seriously all the way until, I ended up getting into USC's, their studio guitar program, for
Mm.
college, which was like a good program. When I got there, I realized how good the other students were, like my classmates. I was really at the bottom of that sort of cohort, of folks, and yeah, that sort of when light bulbs started flickering of like, oh, maybe I'm not cut out to just be a guitarist, because it was sort of my ambition to just be like a guitar hero or a studio guitarist. And I started to recognize that, wow, the people that do this are really, really good. And sort of what sealed that fate was I was fortunate enough. I got an internship at Fox, at the recording stage, at the Newman recording stage.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah. And so I watched all the sessions. They were doing like the Matrix Revolutions. They're doing Seabiscuit. Um,
I think
Thomas
Armin
Newman was
Steiner
doing,
was the mixer on Matrix, right?
yes.
He was on the board.
Yeah. And Armin Steiner mixed a lot of that stuff. And
Freaking flawless.
yeah,
Like
he
the
would
best
just do
sounding hybrid score still to this day.
yeah. And there's just like mixing like on the console, like doing it live, basically. It was crazy. And
Yeah, amazing.
but for me, the thing was seeing the studio guitarists in there, like George Deering and Dean Parks and all of these
Yeah,
people,
gods.
and they just play perfectly. Like they'd get the sheet music in front of them, and with the story with most guitarists is like, if you want them to stop playing, just put a sheet of music in front of them, because like we're notoriously bad at sight reading, and I'm definitely included in that bunch. So seeing these studio musicians, guitarists, and they were just incredible, recognizing like truly I'll never get there. Like I could spend my whole life, I'll never get there. And at that same time, like I had, as a freshman at USC, I started to think like I need to explore other things as well. And I was interested in music production. I was interested in electronic music. Um, and so interning at Fox, watching the sessions, watching the session musicians was when I was like, all right, this is like not going to be what I'm doing, because I'm not cut out for it. And so I started to like
George Deering is a very brutally unfair comparison to make to yourself as a freshman, because it would be literally like, I put my first pen to paper to write an orchestra piece. I'm going to go sit next to John Williams now and just get this wide gulf is so ridiculously unfair to hold yourself to, as you were what, 19 or something at the time.
Yeah. Well,
it's a
so
savage thing to do to yourself.
To be fair, this was probably my third year of college, like going into the senior where I was interning and watching the sessions. But yes.
Okay, so yeah, 21 or 2. Yeah, you were over the hill. I retract my statement. Yeah, you should have been held to the highest possible standard that a human could be at that age.
But my point is that like, you do have to see like what is the top of the mountain, right? And
No, it's
and
true.
then it's like if that's an area where you want to be, like, especially a competitive field, and that you want to work in, like, you either have to have a really specialized niche where you have a competitive advantage, or you have to be competing at that level. And I just knew that wasn't going to happen. So, um, fortunately, I had other interests, and I think also experiencing that, like seeing these musicians that are at the absolute peak, made me think about, like, well, what is the purpose of doing this? Like, what do I care about music? Is it just to be, like, of the best, and to, or is there something else with music that I'm trying to say with it that matters more? And I started thinking about music that I love, and it's not always the best musicians that make great music. Like, this is not an insult to some of my favorite bands, but, like, I really like New Order. I like Joy Division. I like The Cure. But if we stick with Joy Division for a moment, they could kind of barely play. Like, it was there. It's on the verge of falling apart. And that's no disrespect to it, because the music is fantastic and I love it, and it's extremely powerful. And what they have to say is sometimes 100 times more powerful than, another guy who I love, Yngwie Malmsteen, like shredding on the guitar. Sometimes Joy Division sloppily playing a part out of time, but that with, the right energy and the right feeling, it expressed a lot more in a more sincere way than something that's perfectly executed. And so, it made me think about, what is it with music that I'm trying to say, and to really dig into what it is that I care about with music. And so that, I think, going through that experience, I started to switch directions into music production, and then, you know, um, from there, I was fortunate enough to then work. There was a film composer, but he's mainly an electronic musician, named BT, and I worked for him, like, after I graduated USC, and that was a good learning experience, in the sense that, it was I was developing the music production skills. I was also able to work on some films and things that he was working on, and then also further hone my own sound. And while sort of working professionally and seeing, like, how does a professional operate, and then with him, it was seeing kind of also how he lived out his personal life and his professional life, and some of the mistakes he made too. And I learned a lot from the mistakes he made of, like, he's an extremely competent guy and very capable. But he would push the limits of things, and, like, he could be very reactive. And there were things where I was like, oh, wow, that didn't, that didn't work out like anybody hoped for, So it was,
That's
it
a
was a
very
really,
that's a very, just to put a little parenthetical on that,
yeah,
sorry to cut you off, but
no,
that's a, I think, an underappreciated thread when talking about our formative experiences. We always tend to tell those stories that kind of valorize our heroes and show us, oh, that moment that I realized I could do this too, and all that sort of stuff. And but I suspect a lot of us have had those moments where we got a glimpse a of sort of things that we didn't want for ourselves, either because it seemed objectively bad or just because it wasn't the right fit. And I've certainly had my share of those as well, where I would meet a composer and say, "Oh wow, you kind of represent the things I don't want to be," and not as a "I'm better than you" way or anything remotely like that. It's just like it's a counter example, versus an example that we would aspire to. And I feel like that's something we don't talk about particularly often in our, in the panels and interviews and all that kind of stuff that we do. But that's a very even, without obviously digging into the details of what you mean, just knowing that that was educational in some
yeah.
sense in that way is pretty illuminating.
I mean, you can, obviously you learn best from your own mistakes, but hopefully you can learn from some of the mistakes of others, or, and also of course, like there's a lot of things that he did right that I learned from it as well. So basically, to sort of continue on from there, you know, at some point I realized I wanted to just work on my own. I wanted to make my own music. And so I stopped working for him, after, I think it was like 2007 or so. And I started my own electronic music project that was called Trifonic. And I spent a year, lived back at my parents' house and made a record, and along with my brother. And and I put that out, and I was like, okay, this is where things I can kick off my own career. And it's like, and so I put out this first album called Emergence, and like absolutely nobody cared because I put it out myself and I didn't know really what to do with it. Um, and but I believed in it, and it was, and there was like, there was things that were good about it. And it just like, I didn't know how to get it out there. So then I had to start working, and I started doing jingles. And this is also where Brian White comes involved, is like, we were friends, and we started working on some of these jingles together, um, for the same company. And then while that was all brewing, like my triphonic music started to bubble up in the background. Like some producers started to discover it, other musicians, but it took like 2 years before it caught on. So I had to just like work, which was good. And so, we're working on these commercials. I was also teaching, there's a school in San Francisco. I don't think it exists anymore. It was called Pyramind. And I was teaching like music synthesis classes.
Does it not
there.
exist anymore? It's funny. I haven't heard anyone mention it in a while, but I didn't think it was gone.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I think they might.
They just sold their last building. I think it exists maybe only on the internet. I know they recently like sold their last piece of property in San Francisco. So
Yeah, but they
it
might
still
still
just be on
be
the internet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I was just making ends meet. We're just doing whatever. And so like Brian and I were working on commercials. I was teaching at Pyramind, and that's also where I met Paul Lipson, who's a game composer and now like audio executive kind of person. And so through like the friendship with Paul, and and then just the reputation I'd built with my electronic music with Trifonic, there started to be some opportunities with games, which was not something that was on my radar at all. And so, for basically the first opportunity pretty much was the 10th anniversary of Halo, like Halo Combat Evolved, the first one. Pyramind like got that project, like Paul, he was doing that project, and he's like, hey, can I bring you in to recreate all of the like the synth parts that Marty and Michael did for it, for this basically updated version, the 10-year anniversary of Halo. And then, I brought in Brian White to help me with that too, just because, it was a lot of work, and this was like a good opportunity. And so that was sort of our primary entrance into games. And so we did a really good job with that. That's actually where we met Christopher Melroth, was on that project. And he was really impressed because we figured out basically how they didn't know exactly how the audio engine worked for the original Halo when they were recreating it. They sort of like it was split up into all these little loops, and they weren't exactly sure how the parts fit together, because they were all these like different crossfading loops that you could do in any order, and they're trying to just figure out like how is
it
this?
Wasn't in Wise. It was the original.
Yeah,
it was because they were just remastering the graphics, and they just had to use the original audio engine that existed like in 2000 whatever one when it came out.
Isn't it crazy how fast in games suddenly things become this kind of like archaeology where you something could be 5 years old and it already is something where you're going, we need the equivalent of a Rosetta Stone to even know what the hell we're looking at here. It's crazy. Like Halo to the 10th anniversary Halo is such a hilariously short amount of time, but yet this is such a recurring motif in the industry, you know, of how the hell do we just especially if you go back to, you know, any game even slightly not modern before people started thinking about this more conscientiously. There was no documentation or anything like we would typically have today also. So yeah, that's funny. I knew you guys worked on it, but I didn't realize this part of it. I hadn't even thought about the idea that it would be this giant mystery.
Well, yeah, because I mean, basically that was not even, you know, our responsibility. Like it was just, you know, but then it sort of, we started to figure it out. And then, you know, like, because it was Paul and then Tom Salta and Lenny Moore were all in the project. And then we were just doing just recreating the synth parts, trying to make them more modern, make them, you know, but everybody was kind of struggling with this weird format of the loops that were all like where these crossfades were embedded. So sometimes at the start of it, it's like these sounds would appear out of nowhere, trying to figure out how to all work together. And so like Brian and I really dug in there and figured it out and figured out how to recreate them and bake in the crossfades into it. And so then we did that, like with all of the assets that everyone did, was sort of get them in the same format so we could drop them into this 2001 audio engine and just have them work. You know, we just name the files exactly the same. It's a new asset, drop it in, and it worked. And so I think Christopher Melroth was very impressed by that. And, you know, so after that project, because that was 2011. So in 2013, that's when we started Finishing Move, because Brian and I talked and we're kind of like, hey man, maybe we should, you know, team up, start working together on everything, like for real, and start a company and try to take on bigger things. Because prior to that, we were just, you know, again, doing jingles, which was not that fun. And doing like like session work, subcontracting work for people. And we wanted to try to just like, what can we do that's our own?
Well, so then let's narratively construct this like, you know, Last of Us 2. So we've got to the moment of your head-on-head collision with one another, and we will now then warp back in time to retell the story in parallel of alternate Brian path into this collision course. Yes,
when I was a 5-year-old boy, my dad showed me Star Wars, and nice. I said, I want to be a composer. No, I'm just kidding. That's not
I was so excited for the like hard opposite side of the tracks approach.
No. Yeah, I grew up in a really musical family. My family still owns a music store in my hometown of Tehachapi in the mountains of I guess that's like Central California. It's
never heard of
like
that.
2 hours from LA.
Wow,
it's very
how big
small.
A town is that? Like population-wise?
I would say it's like, when I was growing up, it was less than 5,000 people. It's probably like more like 20 now, but
crazy.
You know, like when I was a kid, there was like no actual big grocery stores kind of thing. And then we got our first big grocery store and it was like, oh my God, this is living. We have a supermarket. Now it's got a Walmart and a lot of people doing meth. So it's
proper small
it's come
town
quite a way. Yeah, it's not the same place I grew up, but the music store is still there. So yeah, I just grew up like in a really musical family. We were always having like family bands, and I started on piano because they figured like, hey, that's what a little kid should start on. And I kind of like quickly moved away from that because I thought guitar was way cooler, because that's what my dad played or still plays. And so I was kind of like, nah, dude, piano is just lame. I really wish I would have like kept playing piano.
What kind of music, like you're playing as a family, is so intriguing. That's one of those things I so wish I could relate to that. I always love those kinds of stories. But what sort of music?
So yeah, like like my dad kind of like fancied himself. He was kind of like a band leader and he had a lot of different bands, but it was always like R&B bands. He was kind of like, think Blues Brothers. Like he really thought
Oh
he was like
wow.
Johnny Otis or something like that. And so it was always that kind of like, R&B bands with a horn section, like that kind of thing,
Amazing.
Wilson Pickett, that kind of stuff, like Motown, you know, R&B, soul, James Brown, that kind of stuff. So yeah, like really like eclectic, mix
Yeah.
of stuff
Did
that
you gig
I
around
heard.
town and stuff, or like and elsewhere, or like in other words, was this treated as a hobby? We jam in the garage, or was it like no, we're gonna go out and do stuff?
So I mean my dad certainly did when I was a very young kid. He had several bands that he would like go play shows with and stuff like that
Hmm.
around sort of like the area, I guess you'd say, because it was a small town, so you're kind of bouncing around between different spots. But yeah, when we was like my brother and my brother's a drummer. When we were kids, like we would always like perform for the family functions and stuff like that. So we would kind of like do little set lists, and then we would all kind of play at the. I have a really big family, and everybody lived there in the small town, so it was one of those things where I had like a ton of cousins and aunts and uncles, like both my mom's side and my dad's side. It was like 5 siblings each, and so it was big family, and everybody pretty much lived within an hour of there. So there was a lot of
Wow.
like that kind of like big family functions, and we would always
Steady
play.
audience
And
supply.
no, it was great. Yeah, it was like it really helped like kind of build my confidence, being on stage and kind of getting a taste of performing, because I would go on to play in bands in high school and middle school and stuff like that. I switched to guitar probably like around 10 or 11, and right around kind of like when Nirvana and Metallica and all those bands were like really kind of hot on the charts. And it was like, okay, because a lot of those songs, the cool thing about a lot of that early 90s stuff is that it was pretty simple for like a new guitar player to learn, and it was like
Mm,
really exciting, because you could play like Metallica, Unforgiven, or Nothing Else Matters, or something like that, and you could get the essence of the main riff and like feel pretty cool, like
right,
even
right.
as a seventh grader. Or Nirvana, like Smells Like Teen Spirit or something like that, like bar chords and power chords, and you could really kind of like feel like you were a part of culture without a lot of production or fancy technical ability or anything like that. So I think it was like a super exciting time, at least for me and a lot of my friends, like learning guitar and playing guitar, because it was always like something would come on the radio and it would be guitar oriented, and you could most likely play it, or learn how to play it as like a guitar player that's been playing for like a year or two. So it was
Hmm.
definitely like uh, a, a great era. I feel like to come up in as like someone experiencing an instrument, but like just having that interest that's like outside of your parents' interest in you learning music. Like you're really like, I want to learn this, and then I want to start writing my own songs, and so that's how I really came into it. It's just like being in a musical family, playing in bands in high school. I played in jazz band in high school. So that was kind of like my first introduction to, I guess you'd say, like formal music education. Like I didn't play in band earlier because I was a guitar player, and that was kind of the first opportunity that you
Right.
would typically have in school to play in band was jazz band. And it was funny because the school was so small and the band was so small that uh, they didn't have jazz band all, 4 quarters of the school year. And so everybody in band had to be in marching band in football season, like no
Of
matter what,
course.
even if you played guitar. And I didn't get to play
That's
guitar
interesting.
in marching band. I got to play auxiliary percussion. So that was like
Huh.
a humbling, Like, have no idea how to be a percussionist. I was in ninth grade because I had joined jazz band. I had tried out as a middle schooler. And so I, started right in ninth grade as a freshman. And my first experience with band is not playing guitar, which I was very competent at that point in my playing career. I was playing crash cymbals, the most loud.
Hell yeah!
If you screw up, you're the most obvious.
Seen that many times.
and the thing that I learned really quick that it's unlike guitar. There's an inertia to cymbals, and you got to start about an eighth or a quarter note before the beat that you want to land. So there was a lot of I would have one part in the whole song, and it would be at the end, like the crescendo, and it'd be like, it would be, and I would do that in front of a whole football stadium like a freaking asshole. But that was my like sort of first humbling experience of and interacting with.
But presumably the next
instrument.
step for you was to apply to USC's studio crash cymbal program, and
that was kind of
see if that could be the path for you.
It was definitely the path for me. I would say, like, when I got to play the triangle, I preferred that. That was a little bit more tactile. Sure. But they never let me play the timpani or snare drum or anything. That was for the actual drummers. They got to play the cool drums, like the like nerd guitar, because the bass player also in jazz band had to like do something during marching season, and it was usually something embarrassing like a tambourine or that kind of thing. But yeah, I played in bands both in school and just like actual punk and hardcore bands in high school that we would form. I feel like we formed a new band every week. It was that kind of thing where you spend a lot of time figuring out the name of your band, and then you'd practice once, and then you'd form a new band. The cool thing was, though, because of the music store, we had like a huge rehearsal space in the back that like I just had access to 24/7. So I could go and be loud and jam with all my friends anytime I wanted to, which was kind of a huge thing. Like living in a small town, there's not a lot of stuff to do. So you're either going to like get in trouble, which we did plenty of, or, jam at the music store, which is called Lee's House of Music. Lee is my dad. That's where I get my middle name, Brian Lee White, from. And yeah, then I went to school, and you'd think that I was so keen on music that I would go to music school. I did not. I went to UC Santa Cruz, and I started as a computer science major. That was way too hard. They like the math. I was like, okay, not doing this. So after my first quarter, I said, we're going to do business and economics. And so I stuck with that, and I ended up like taking the path of becoming a CPA. Like, so I got all the credits from accounting. So I was going to be an accountant. I even interned for like a big public accounting firm in Silicon Valley. And yeah, I did this internship in either third year or right before my fourth year. I did an internship where you actually go and you work there like for a couple months during the summer, and it's like full-time, like immersion kind of thing. And I hated it. I was like, oh my God, like I cannot do this. I had like a full-on like quarter life crisis, existential meltdown at that internship. I'm glad I did it, because I would have not known.
Yeah,
and
sure.
Then as soon as I hit my like fourth year, I was like, hey, I got to do something different. Like this isn't going to work. And at the same time, my brother was kind of just like milling around, not doing anything, like really having like no direction. And they were like, oh, well, why don't we send him to like music production school or like a Full Sail kind of thing. And I remember like seeing the brochure. I'm like, dude, why does he get to do this? Like I want to do this. This sucks. Like don't waste money on him. he's he's a lost cause. And I didn't end up going to one of those schools, but what I did do is I decided like I am not going to be an accountant. So I graduated early, and then I just went and interned at studios. I gave up this
in
job
the Bay Area, Silicon Valley kind of area.
In the Bay Area. Yeah, the first one was in San Jose. I found this studio, and I moved there to San Jose to work at this studio, and I kind of like my way in was your typical like kind of like IT kind of stuff. Like back then, like people didn't really know how computers worked. I feel like they still don't know how they work, but studio tech back then was like you had, console, tape machine, but then computers and Pro Tools were very much a thing. This was 2004.
Right.
But like when they broke, they really broke.
Basically.
Yeah. And so the tech on those things, like when things broke, they had cards in them, and it was like the drivers and everything had to be just like, we're so lucky these days that like we can just like put stuff up and it mostly works. So yeah, I basically made myself super useful by doing a bunch of tech stuff, and that was kind of my, way in, and I still tell people to this day, I'm like, like figure out how to make yourself useful. Like if you want to, be part of something, what can you offer? Like, obviously I couldn't come in and mix records. I couldn't come in and like, start being a studio musician or anything like that. I just didn't have, I was like 22 years old. I didn't have, the ears or the knowledge. What I did know is I didn't know how to use computers, and I knew how they worked, and I could read a manual, and I could stay up all night, figuring something out. And that basically like just allowed me to hang around and, get more responsibilities and start doing sessions, like they would start putting me on like the late night hip hop sessions. And dude, this was talk about crazy stuff. Like imagine like a very timid 22-year-old little white kid, and there's like Bay Area hip hop hyphy session. There's like 10 dudes. The weed smoke is like just permeating the studio. Couple of guys have like guns on them, and I'm just like from a small town, like, and I'm the only one in the studio that's like part of the studio. And I'm like, I guess I'm here. Like, I gotta make sure that like nothing gets broken or stolen or no one gets killed. But that really like that
just leave without locking the doors. I imagine would be like, the biggest risk. You just,
of course,
in the haze of it all, you're just leave. That's always my biggest fear.
Man, dude, locking up the studio was always like my most nervous time because there was a big alarm system, and it was exactly. And it was in this warehouse. You've been to studios that are always in like, somehow they're always next to like a freaking like
a chop shop or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like a chop shop or like a tire factory or something like that. And
something where it's definitely a front for some money laundering scheme.
Exactly. They're always in these like weird industrial areas because it's the only places that they'll let you build out and do cool stuff.
Right. And where you have the square footage reasonably cheaply to actually build something that can have like separation and all that kind of
exactly. Like it's the only place where you could like build rooms within a room, right? Because your typical office spaces just don't have that. So yeah, I just started like working in studios. I also at the same time started teaching a bunch. Like that was a big way that I kind of like upped my knowledge and kind of like funded my existence. I started teaching Pro Tools and Logic and sort of production software kind of stuff as part of this training school that they ended up like making me an owner of, because the other owner, he was my mentor, and he was the one that owned the studio that I first started working at and everything like that. And like, in hindsight, he definitely was like, I can definitely bail and just, I will leave these other guys with this bag of this kid who is pretty smart, but he will be loyal to them, and I can bail. And so he like bailed, and I was like 24 years old, and they're like, you have to run this school. And I'm like, okay. Like, because these other two guys were just investors. They were just like, they weren't on the technical side of things. And so this other dude was, like he is a veteran recording engineer, had been doing it forever, making records and everything like that for like, 30, 40 years. And he was kind of like over it. He wanted to bail out of the school situation. And he trained me and basically was like, okay, see ya. And so now I'm running this school, like just on my own, doing like Pro Tools certification and stuff like that. And that's actually how I met Trifon. Like that's so I was running the school, and we had some other teachers, and it was kind of my job to make sure that like we, like hired teachers and had, qualified people there, because I couldn't teach every class. It was like for a while I was like working every day, like we're talking about like 9 to 5, like teaching like all day, and I would just crash out because my voice would be just completely toasted. And yeah, and we lost a teacher. He's just like, yeah, I got a job. I got a real job. It's funny, he actually got a job like at doing Guitar Hero programming at Activision. And so I talked to a friend who I was making a bunch of music with at this time. At the same time, I was just making records and mixing records and kind of like trying to pursue a career as a music producer, mixer, engineer kind of thing while running this school to pay the bills. And the guy I was making a record with at the time, a friend, Quinn Walker, I was like, do you know anybody that like maybe could like come and teach here? And he's like, yeah, I have this friend, Brian Trifon. He was working for BT down in LA, but now he's back in the Bay. He's, he made a record and he's trying to promote it, and he definitely needs work. And I was like, sick. And so I talked to Trifon. I'm like, do you know how to use Pro Tools?
I love when someone needs work.
I asked him if he knew how to use Pro Tools, and he was like, not really. And I'm like, well, I could teach you. So
yeah, that was the best part. He's like, hey, do you know Pro Tools? Is like, not really, like a little bit. And he's like, oh, that's fine, you can teach it.
Well, I knew that he knew Logic, and that was part of our program there. And I knew that he had experience, like actual experience, working on films and records and stuff like that. And so that was like more important to me in terms of finding someone to come in and
Right.
and mentor people and stuff like that. Is like, okay, like this is someone who's has experience to share. And the technical, the software is software. Like, I mean, it all does the same stuff, and so it's mostly about like how are you using the software and like what anecdotes you could kind of share with these people. Because this was all sort of career level training, not these weren't children. These were kind of like adults
like
coming
hobbyists.
Hobbyists and adults trying to either start a career or, maybe they like, their church is sending them to like get certified in an Avid, kind of program or something like that.
Right. Of course. Sure. Yeah.
And so, yeah, he started working at this school. And that's kind of like when we, first started working together and stuff like that. And so like fast forward to like 2008 financial crisis, like the school lost all of our state funding. So like we used to be able to give grants and loans to students. And that was like half of our business model was like people would come in and they'd be like, hey, I don't have any money. And we go, okay, the state will give you a loan. And we would get money from the state. The financial crisis happened and they basically came in and said like, okay, like half the schools on this list, you're all off. Like you're cut from funding. So we no longer had an option other than just like pay us cash to come to the school. And that cut our business in half. And like within a year or two, it was like, yeah, this is not going to happen anymore. Like we didn't have enough enrollment to like keep the building. So I started like teaching out of my like home studio and stuff like that. And it just kind of like totally frittered out. At the same time, that's kind of where Brian and I started picking up the work in the ad world. Like we worked for a couple music houses doing like corporate background music jingles. Like, you know, I wrote a commercial for Men's Warehouse, a mattress company, you know, the living the dream. But the cool thing about that, I would say, is while we grew tired of that fairly quickly, that was like the first time I think in my life where I sort of recognized that, okay, I could do this composing thing and like I can make money at it. You know, before then I'm like trying to make records. The records don't do well. Right. I'm trying to get work, you know, with more famous artists, and then that's a struggle, like trying to get paid from them. And, you know, it's always just like this crazy, like, you know, sometimes you're working, sometimes you're not. We started working with these music houses, and I was like, man, like we, you know, like I can make a couple $1,000 like doing this or that. And it was like, it was crazy. It went from kind of being like, you know, loser engineer, you know, music producer to like, oh, like there's something here, you know, there's like, I could see like a career happening from this just because of the, you know, the stability of the work. And like, they were actually like paying us like pretty good. And I think at the time, the reason we were successful was I think we both have had an ability to kind of, do a lot with a little in terms of production and sound wise. So, you know, this was pre YouTube, you know, where you could literally learn how to get any sound at any time now. Like you can, like, if you want to like sound like, you know, John Williams, you can type up and there's a guy on YouTube like teaching you all the orchestration and the mock-up.
Download the John Williams chord packs.
Download the chord packs. Yeah. You know, and you could say that with any band. Like you want to have drums like Nirvana, you want to have, you know, guitars like this band. Now it's like you just it's a chat GPT away, right? Or a YouTube video away. Back then that there were no resources like that. And so, you know, in the commercial space, as you know, everybody's wants to do sound alikes, and they want to, you know, they're like, hey, we can't afford the Black Keys. Can you do something that sounds like the Black Keys, and can you have it done, you know, by tomorrow? And so we were really good at kind of like distilling a lot of like what made those things sonically, you know, unique or compelling, in terms of production, whether it was drum sounds or synth sounds or guitar or a vocal or something like that. Just kind of able to mimic that good enough. Like it definitely wasn't, you know, it wasn't the Black Keys, but it was like good enough to play in the background of like a network router corporate, you know, like corporate presentation corporate in Las Vegas.
I did a share of those too, back probably around those same years, you know, like 2007, 8, kind of, you know, give or take. A thing that I'm assuming production music and libraries essentially wiped out that whole kind of industry of the idea of hiring a composer specifically for one of those. But I definitely did my share, and it's awful. It's just like, it's always the same type of actor who they're like, did you know that we're expanding into the Pacific Northwest? And it's a lot of exciting opportunity. And it's like, there's a certain kind of vibe to those little, you know, industrial or corporate training video type things.
It's the corporate. Yeah.
Like corporate spiritual sound. I mean, a lot of it was like taking U2 as the template, but like taking any of the like sort of edge, not the guitarist, but like the like smoothing out the edges on it that like make it like kind of like kind of
What it is.
cool. Yeah. And then just like keeping sort of the like that uplifting feeling, and yeah, it's bad.
It was the way I basically maintained sanity during that period was I was getting paid like regularly for the first time in my life, so it was like, okay, like I can kind of compartmentalize this, and B, it was exciting to like have, okay, you've got 4 hours and you got to like find how to make this sound. Like, how do you
Right, sure.
produce this? How do you distill or get close enough that it's going to be able to work in the background of one of those things? And that was always like, even though the music ended up being pretty lame and tame and not very inspiring, but like the process of like, again, like kind of like having no tether, you have no information, you can't go look up like, how did they do this? And you're just there with, your sample libraries and your whatever, like 2007, 2008 state of the art computer technology was, trying to figure out like how, how do we make this work? And I think it helped. I think it helped shaped a lot of kind of like what we ended up becoming known for as composers in the game world and stuff like that. Just that kind of doing a lot with a little, like doing a lot of sound, doing something that sounds really cool, but not necessarily, like say having an orchestra to record or having a bunch of session musicians to record, just kind of like relying on ourselves. That's also when I kind of like had to like get back into playing keys again, because it's like not everything is a guitar, and so like figuring out like how to program and do that kind of stuff. It kind of really set us up, for success, later, when we kind of joined forces after the Halo thing. And yeah, I mean, it was cool to just you know start collaborating on stuff, and I think we work really well together, and there was always like, if it wasn't something that like I could do, he could do, and if it wasn't something that he could do, I could do. And so it was like this kind of mutually beneficial collaboration. And I think it was we I think we both, you went to guitar school, Brian, not
Yeah.
production school, and I didn't go to any sort of music school at all, and we kind of learned like how to compose and do all this stuff kind of on our own, right? Like, no,
Yeah,
not a lot of formal
absolutely.
training. Uh and so I think at that time it was really nice to just be like, man, like let's not just put it all on myself. Like, let's have a like a partner that it's like somebody else to like share the anxiety and sort of the like, we can both uh you know fake it till we make it together, kind of
Yeah.
thing, as opposed to just kind of like being out there on your own. I
So
think
that
that kind of
that brings two questions, sort of having now reconverged on your colliding moment here. It is interesting how it's very plainly obvious how kind of complementary your skills ended up being teed up to be, just by the random luck of the lives that you led, basically. But at the same time, it does seem like in a if you think of it as like the two of you as circles in a Venn diagram, there's a pretty healthy amount of overlap. It seems like it's not like one of you was like this hardcore East Coast jazz musician or something who just never thought once about technology or whatnot. Like, you clearly have a healthy amount of overlap at the same time, which I can only imagine has been really helpful and important to kind of fluidly speaking the same language. So two questions I'm curious for you guys to bat around is, first off, a question that invariably comes up with this sort of thing is actually, you know what, I'll ask that second, because it'll be a perfect road forward from there. The other question was this, finding a dynamic as a partnership. I have very little experience with this. I've done kind of collaborative co-writing in a few instances, and it's always a little bit. It's kind of like finding a dance partner on the dance floor as opposed to like someone you know already. You know what I mean? There's a certain sense of we can make this work. That's kind of like the optimal thing, because it's just, it's like dating, or at its best, it's still a little awkward because you're getting to know each other. That's just the nature of human interaction. So I'm always fascinated by these like long running partnerships where clearly it transcends that. It's, if one is dating, this is closer to marriage, where you just are, you really know a lot about each other's instincts and all that. So what I'm driving at in terms of my thing I'm curious about is a thread that's in both of your stories that was interesting is that you kind of were picking up skill, but a little bit restless with just using the skill in a very kind of almost the musical equivalent of like manual labor way. You both seemed to kind of yearn for something more, right? And to be expressing yourselves and to actually kind of channeling what you were learning into something more meaningful than commercials and corporate videos and things like that. And so that's what to me highlights what's interesting about the idea of forming a partnership, because that desire for self-expression would seemingly be at odds with forming a duo. Because it's kind of like, oh, I really want to do my thing. I don't want to just keep doing these Black Keys sound alikes, So I'm curious how that reconciles. Is it clear? I feel like I'm kind of rambling in my attempt to articulate the question. Does it make sense what I'm driving at?
It does. I mean, I think it was very natural. I mean, partially, like I'd say, at least from my perspective, is that, we were different in terms of work speed too. Like I am not prolific. I'm pretty slow. And Brian White is very fast. And so, that was like, just working together that speeds up the whole thing, and so it was,
or maybe we found that slows it down.
Well, yeah, maybe, but like we had complementary skills in the sense that, like, I feel like one of the things I've always been good at is like just having a unique sound. I'm good at like special sauce stuff, but then sometimes like just like cranking stuff out, I really get hung up, like get lost in the details. And, so to have somebody that can work really fast, and then I can put some special sauce on it, or he can be like, bro, just like stop, move on from those 4 measures and like just crank this out. And, like somebody to push basically. And it goes both directions, like we can push each other to one, make things better, 2, to get things done faster. And then it was also just that, Brian White also has an exceptional mixing skills too. And so that was something that, like, as we started working together more, we just, developed into like, well, okay, he's going to do the final mixes on everything. I don't need to waste hours like trying to do a good demo mix when he can crank out the mix in 20 minutes and it's going to sound way better than me spending hours trying to get it somewhere. So it's like, it's the complementary skills, I think, is really what
I think
made that work.
the other thing that is probably interesting about our story, I feel like maybe not a lot of people know this, but like there was this kind of moment where we were both working, like this was like early, I think in the first Halo thing. So we were both kind of like that the game thing had kind of like started, or at least the okay, this is a pathway, because it was like doing the synth programming, and you had done some like guitar work for Jesper and stuff like this. It was like 2010. And then we were both also doing pop music production for a big producer down here in LA. So like doing like actual writing sessions and stuff like that, doing the music side of pop music writing. And it was kind of like, I think there was this point where I was, we were getting pretty busy in both of those. And it was kind of like, okay, like we know we work well together, and we know we've got something here. Like, let's take the thread that is the most successful, right? And so like we kind of almost like hedged our bets, right? Where we're like, okay, we're gonna do this game thing, we're gonna do this pop music thing. Both like kind of like had, pretty cool looking pathways, because it was like some of the people we were doing like sessions for, it was like Britney Spears, Beyonce, like these were big acts that we were doing writing sessions for with this producer in LA. And Halo is obviously a big video game. And so it's kind of like, we need to explore both of these threads. We can't, like if we give both of these threads our full attention, like we can kind of like maximize our potential outcomes, because we had this idea of like forming a company, forming a partnership and that kind of thing, because we knew we worked together and we knew we just like, but we wanted more than the commercial stuff, like you were saying. Like we wanted to like really have a voice, really be creative. And so these kind of two paths were in front of us. And we worked them like real hard. And the game one just ended up being the one that, yielded the best fruit. The pop one kind of like it was fun for 2 years. It was a grind, but it ultimately kind of just like fizzled out and blew up. But yeah, it was like, it
Does
was
that mean that
almost
you kind of let those paths in a sense decide for you? In other words, like it's not that you sat down one day and said, okay, column A is the game industry, column B is pop production, and just kind of hash it out. You're saying it felt more like the pop thing ended up just sort of not marching onward, while games meanwhile were.
Yeah, it didn't really pan out. Yeah, so we just went in the direction of like where things led,
It's interesting. I remember years ago going to a concert, the film composer Elliot Goldenthal. He did like Interview with the Vampire and all these big movies, and he especially in the 90s. I remember I went to a concert where they were playing music of his, and he came out on stage, and he has this very, very like intense classical training. He had studied with like Aaron Copland and stuff, and I remember the conductor said, given your background, I'm curious why you chose to focus, overwhelmingly your creative time and energy on writing film scores. And he goes, it's really simple. Go where you're wanted. And
100%.
That always stuck with me, of just like, it's so pragmatic. And he's like, yeah, people had money burning a hole in their pocket, and somehow my name ended up on the memo line of those checks. So I became a film composer. And it sounds kind of similar. You're like, oh, well, they seem to like us at Microsoft and elsewhere. So
it was where we wanted, and and also like what's cool. Like, I mean, we had sort of like cool opportunities, and like what was the cool opportunity that also wanted us, and right. was willing to reciprocate. And I think just like we've always been that way, like super open about how like we never sat out to be video game composers or even composers at all, but we were always open to, let's explore this. Do we like this? Yeah, this is pretty fun. And then, doing the ads, it was like, I like this, but I don't like working for these people, but I like the music and the production and everything like that. Like maybe we can take it over here. Okay, pop music. Okay, I also don't like these people. They don't treat me very well. Okay, games. This is really cool. And the cool thing that we discovered with games is like, I mean, it's such a cool industry. And I think that they're so open, unlike at the time film and TV music was a little bit more rigid, like that games were just so open to like new voices and different approaches. And it was just like the people working in the music and the audio were cool people, like Chris Melroth and Paul Lipson, like just like cool guys that you could, not like Hollywood guys, right? You're like, dude, these guys are cool. Like, I just want to hang out with them. Like, it's cool to work with these people. And games was, like having that taste of that. It was like, this is really cool. Like, we can be creative, we can make music. And they welcome like our crazy ideas and stuff like that. But it's also like kind of a pretty cool work environment, I guess. I mean, obviously there's crunch, but it's like, I think you'd agree that like, like audio directors are usually pretty chill people. And and
plus anytime I've ever found myself, crunching pretty hard. Funny enough, very apropos your story, the literal words that I have said 1,000 times is, look, if I'd wanted normal hours and to be an accountant, I could have done that. I've used that exact phrase 100 times of, if this stress is not for me, there's other things I could have done. And obviously the point being, I would so much rather take crunch and whatever stress that comes with this. Like at its worst days, this is still a dream job and so amazing that we get to do this, that bring on the tough days, and plus the added bonus that you're usually in the trenches with people that are pretty terrific. And that makes all the difference.
Yeah, they're crunching too, right? That's what I always felt like special about games versus some of the more like Hollywood centric stuff is just like how the person that you report to, they're in there with you. They're like in freaking Wise, stressing out, like trying to ship a game, fixing bugs, and you're there like trying to like crunch minutes and like get stuff in and make sure it all works. Versus the like, it's not like an executive going like, I think this could sound a little bit more, and then like taking off. Oh
man, I don't want to derail you here, but I once probably around that same time, actually, like 2009 or 10, a composer buddy of mine called me in a panic. A movie he had been hired to score had totally fucked its post-production schedule and basically found itself in a situation where they were 7 days away from like a full orchestra recording session, a union job at the Warner Brothers scoring stage in Burbank, 2 days with an orchestra, 1 week away with no music. And the movie was like not even really edited together. It was kind of a scatter shot of individual scenes with a copy of the script to try to understand how they fit together. And my buddy calls me and goes, there's no physical way I can write this in time. Can you help me? And we'll tag team. It'll just kind of like each pick a scene. When you run out of music, find the next scene. And so I ended up coming on, it was 90 minutes of music that had to be turned around in basically 5 days, and then scores and parts made to be ready to go on the stand. So it was to this day, it's the most extreme crunch I've ever, because it was 5 consecutive all-nighters. We worked 120-hour sprint without stopping. And I think it would kill me physically if I did that today. Like once I got into my 40s, the body was like, if you pull that shit again, it's truly a one-way trip. And but at the time, there is a kind of a thrill knowing that it's for a real movie and blah, blah, blah. Although it was the worst movie ever made. But all of which to say, we're in the thick of this writing. I wrote like 30 minutes, he wrote an hour, and then I orchestrated essentially all of both of our chunks so that it could all be on the stand in time. And it was so insane. And I remember the director, just to make it as if the incredible schedule, like foobar of this was not bad enough, that because it did not need to be this way. They didn't actually dub the movie until like 3 months later. There was no reason for us to be crunching like this. I found out after the fact. But on top of all that, the director, we would be sending cues, okay, I just finished one. It's 9 p.m. Next one's coming in at 10:30. Next one after that's going to be at 1 a.m. or whatever. And he just would not respond between, 9 o'clock at night and 9 o'clock in the morning. And at one point we call him and we're like, dude, we have all these cues stacked up. We need to know if we can move on or not, because we can count in minutes how much time is left before we got to be ready to go. And I remember he goes, I just don't really like to work late. And we were sitting there going, what the fuck, man? You can't, it's like, it's got to be one or the other. We're either all in it or not. And so we decided, you know what? All good. You do you. If it's 10 o'clock and a cue's done, it's just approved. And that just needs to be the name of the game. And anyway, so yeah, I have never had that experience. To your point, I've never had that experience in games. If it's one of those that I'm at 2 in the morning, I guarantee you I could go on Slack and hit up the audio director and they will be at their computer in that exact same moment. And yeah, it's, and I'm not one to sort of trash Hollywood. I think it has a little bit of a bad rap, sometimes unjustifiably, but then the story I just told, I know a lot of other people have their own stories just like that. So it's maybe a little bit justified, but yeah, in any case, long-winded way of saying I feel you. I totally know what you mean.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's like just the game stuff like felt right to us. It was
Right.
like kind of it was like the really clicked as like, okay, like we can make a serious run at this. Like this is cool. And so we had to form the company. The reason we had to form the company is they actually like Paul Lipson had a project for us at Microsoft where he just wanted us to just kind of like take on the whole thing, like as the vendor, and like do the score supervision and be a composer, and like run the orchestra. Like
Which
be
project was
the.
that?
It
was
actually
a
got
canceled
canceled.
project.
It was a canceled project.
Fun.
It was a canceled project, and it was a cool project. We were going to be co-writing with Bear McCreary. It was awesome. We did some recordings at Skywalker, and that's actually how we met Steve Kaplan, and he became our score engineer and after that. And but yeah, we like it was like a big deal. It was a new IP. It was like gonna be crazy, like this new like sci-fi kind of thing. And we worked on it for like a year,
Yeah,
16,
about a year.
18 months. Yeah. Like we did a bunch of music. There were some pivots where they decided to change the style of the music, like completely, like we're not going to Disneyland, we're going to Magic Mountain kind of like style. And so we were like, okay, like we'll like, let's go. This is our big, this is our big break, right? This is our big thing. And like, we had formed the company for this because we needed a corporation, and we needed like insurance and all this, like, kind of like big boy business pants stuff. And and like in that game, and then they're like, this game is canceled, not because of music, but games get canceled
because of the score.
Yeah.
We've decided to bring down this whole. We're closing the studio.
Game. Everybody's fired. They decided to roll that into like another IP and use the tech and just kind of like close down and not follow that. But thankfully, like they were, like Paul was super impressed with like how we handled, because we did do like recording sessions. We contracted the AFM orchestra. We were signatories. We did all the whole union stuff, and like got all whatever insurance and payroll and all that kind of stuff that we needed to do. Like, thankfully for my accounting background, I was able to kind of like reuse
ready to go
some of those skills, and it wasn't scary. It was just kind of like, okay, like I know how to do this. It's not a big deal. But because of that, like he was just like, Paul was super impressed. And he's like, well, we're doing Halo 2 anniversary. Like, do you guys just want to like do the whole thing, score supervise, like the whole thing? Here's the big budget. Like, this is how many minutes of music we're doing. Like, we're going to record at Skywalker, all this kind of stuff. And yeah, we were kind of like already in the system and set up, and we had already known the process of the synth and the system, because it was the same system at the time that we had sort of cracked the code on. And so he kind of brought us back for that, but also like, hey, like, why don't you just handle like you do the whole, score supervision thing. And so like we subcontracted Lenny Moore and Tom Salsa, and they did a lot of like the orchestral stuff, and the orchestration and everything like that. We still did kind of like the rock and the synth programming. Yeah. We had to like negotiate with Steve Vai to get him to come back with his management. So we had to like, it was like really trial by fire, like throw you right into the deep end. Like now you're like negotiating fees with like these,
it was like
artists.
It was really going from 0 to 1, like it just thrown in the fire, and it was, but yeah, like hiring Steve Vai. And then, we had the issue of, there were some songs on the original soundtrack there's one by Incubus and one by Breaking Benjamin that only had like a couple of years for the license. So they tried to, renew the license, but it's just way too expensive. So then, we had to find, new artists to replace that.
Yeah.
And, so
and
we
like
brought
contract the new artist. Yeah.
Yep. So we brought in our friend, Misha Mansour from this metal band Periphery, he's like one of the current era guitar heroes, to do a couple tracks to replace the Breaking Benjamin and the Incubus one. And so, yeah, that was all like a pretty big success for us as far as the first actual, I mean, besides the canceled one, the first project completed. And, we were very fortunate to just have that opportunity to be like, okay, we're going to throw you a whole bunch of responsibility. And, we just had to figure it out. And, and we did. And then, from there, that really,
I mean, that was a Mario warp whistle. Like,
yes.
again, like kind of like the serendipity of like having worked on the first one and then kind of, you guys figured this out. That's cool. Like, we can trust you there. And then like this canceled game where we, kind of like had to do all this contracting and all this biz side of the composing process. Like, we were able to like show competency there. And it was just kind of like, let's go. Like, and we were like, okay, let's go, and it really like, that really sort of like helped kind of like launch our career into kind of like serious, like, okay, these are serious guys that like are working with serious budgets on serious IP, and they're ready to go. And it was very quick. It was like I think at the same time we were also sort of an aside, a fun fact, our first touch point, even though we did not meet you, we both worked on a game called Drop Chord around that time.
So
for Double Fine.
I was going to bring that up because I also demoed against you on Massive Chalice and lost.
Oh, okay.
And
we also
it's always been one of my favorite. That's like one of my favorite. Recurring themes is I just had this student just graduated Berkeley over here yesterday who was asking me questions about the industry and all that sort of stuff. And she was saying, kind of to your point, she said, film feels kind of cutthroat. Like, people tend to kind of step over each other's dead bodies a little bit, whereas games don't feel that way. And I was basically saying, again, I've had a lot of really positive experiences in film, but I can definitely tell you it's a recurring pleasure to find myself in the ring with familiar faces time and again, because on the one hand, it's sort of a cool measure of your career progress when someone you would really admire, you realize, oh, you're up for the same job, where you like that either their career is in decline or mine is on the ascent. That's cool that people that are good, you're being sort of seen in similar light. And then also because it's just more or less continually a revelation that folks who stick around for more than 5 minutes tend to all be really good people. It's hard to be a total asshole and have a longevity to your career. So there's also that thing of, like, I remember meeting with Brian and Brad, the game director at Double Fine. I was already such a huge, like, my religion growing up was like the LucasArts point and click adventures. So Double Fine for me was sort of sacred territory insofar as, Tim Schafer carrying the torch forward of what were my, pinnacle gaming experiences growing up. And so there's a certain sense of like, there's a nice feeling that when like you're up for a game, it's exciting, it goes another way, but knowing good folks they chose good people. So like the fan in me also is sort of rests easy that this is being looked after by a good group of people. You know what I mean? There's a certain, I never feel like, oh great, that game is, what a shame. Because some asshole has inherited the keys to the kingdom. Or I can't think of having really ever felt that way. Particularly when it's been one of those situations where I demoed against somebody and they took it home. So anyway, yes, I don't know if you knew that I was in the ring on that one.
I don't. Yeah,
I haven't the faintest memory of what I wrote. I have no idea. It clearly wasn't anything to write home about.
I remember a lot of people were, though. That's the one thing I do. I didn't remember specifically who. I remember because they said like a lot of people demoed for it.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
the only person I remember that I knew demoed for it was our friend David Earl, because he straight up told us, he's like, motherfuckers, you got
He's
me.
like,
It was
Yeah.
funny, but yeah, like I only knew because he's like, damn, like got it. But he was also the same as you, like super supportive and like that's
Right.
awesome, kind of thing. Because he's did a bunch of work for Double Fine too, like before he went over to Apple. But yeah, that was what was that, like 2014 when that game came out, or trying to remember?
Sounds
like
about
that.
right. It was definitely more than 10 years ago that the demoing would have taken place.
Yeah, way more than 10 years ago. But I mean, I feel like that was one of the, like, we still use this in our pitches to this day. Like specifically, like we'll just be,
really?
Not that. I'm just saying this technique of like, I remember on that one, we're just
Oh.
like, dude, we're just going to have to be like freaking weird and whatever we, like our own personality. Like we still use kind of that. I remember thinking like, I don't even know if we have a shot for this game. I don't even know like why, like we pitched for it because we did the Double Fine and the drop chord stuff. So Brian knew us from Drop Chord because we did a bunch of EDM tracks for that. And he's like, you guys are cool. Do you want to pitch for this like fantasy, like turn-based, strategy game? And I'm like, is this going to be like Lord of the Rings? Like, are we even like, is this something like that?
Yeah.
Can we even do that? And I knew I was just like, we're just gonna have to be freaking weird. And that's like on the pitch, we were just like, we're just gonna have to be weird because that's the only way that we're gonna like stand out. Just because like, and that's just like kind of been our whole career, right? Like, because it's like, like how do we stand out and like be ourselves and like, make a strong statement, and that was kind of like one of our first lessons in like that works. If you kind of like
it works both ways, because they might, if you make a thing that is sort of just decidedly not what they're looking for, you've also saved everybody time. Sure. It's sort of like I've always felt there's no shame in sort of instantly getting yourself kicked off of a candidate list by being weird, because you're just true to yourself, which is good. But also, you've done the score supervising admin, like when you have a bunch of options of talented people and stuff in front of you, it's actually pretty agonizing. It's really helpful if somebody's like, I've decided to do the mustard flavored ice cream approach. And you're like, okay, I'm sure that's for somebody. It's not what we're looking for here though. And that I think that's actually a net win across the board to do that.
Yeah,
for sure.
I mean, I think, we've, and in more modern times, like the most recent game we did, Doom: The Dark Ages, with that pitching process too, we were, asked pretty late in, they had asked tons of people, and obviously that has a reputation of like, okay, this music is, like Mick Gordon's music is this awesome thing. And so we're like, okay, we have to sort of pull it. If we have any chance, we know there's a million people that are going to do the Mick Gordon thing. It's like, we have to go in a different direction. You know what I mean?
That's a perfect segue. Obviously, that's sort of the catalyst for this conversation. It's worth acknowledging, like Callisto Protocol and some other really big, noteworthy games that you did. But I don't want to run out of time having not talked about Doom.
Sure.
And I appreciate that you kind of jumped straight into the inevitable discussion point. It's a challenging position to be in, because you've got a game that is effectively synonymous with this, with Mick's music. You have two examples to step into. I see it as very analogous to Gordy stepping into Star Wars, where you go, take the most famous example of its type of music that exists and now run with that, And when I had him on here, that was a big part of our discussion as well, is how do you reconcile the knowledge that, unless you manage to just full on clone him, you're never going to win that battle. And even the cloning thing wouldn't even really work, but it's like, but that's sort of, there is an incentive. There's sort of a fear-based incentive, not necessarily an admirable incentive, but there's like always going to be a voice in your head going, well, what would they do in this situation? That's just going to be pushing one direction. And then there's that other voice in your head that you already just acknowledged of, well, smarter or wiser would be to find a different thing. And so, step me through, walk me through the story. You said, okay, first piece of information is that you came in somewhat late, I gather. I didn't know that.
I mean, so basically
late in the pitching process, not late in the game.
Just
so, I see.
Yeah. So the pitch process, they had, reached out to tons of people, like lots of like famous like metal producers and bands and things. And I don't even think we were on their radar for that sort of music at all. I happened to sort of be acquaintances with Chad Mossholder, who's, their principal audio designer there, through the world of like electronic music and sound design. He's really into that. We both use this hardware software thing called Kima for designing sound. So like we knew each other through that world.
Right.
But anyway, for my 40th birthday, my wife bought me this like Yngwie Malmsteen Strat. And so I started just posting pictures of it all the time on Facebook and just endlessly. And I think it kind of clicked in Chad's head that it's like, oh, maybe these guys like do some metal stuff too. And so he just
that would
messaged
pose
me.
in a photo on Instagram must be good at the thing that they're posing in the photo of.
And he's like, well, we're still looking. Let's take a shot. No, so he sent me a message on like Facebook, and he's like, hey man, do you guys want to pitch like some really heavy music for something? And I was like, yeah, sure, we'll try.
Wonder
it.
what that could be.
Right, exactly. And so at the beginning, Brian and I talked about it, and we were just like, our original discussion was kind of like, is this even worth doing this demo? Like, we have no chance. Like, that was our feeling. Right. And it was like, is it worth spending the effort on this? And then, we started to think about it and talk about it with our team too. There's like Alex Klingel and Jay Wilson, who are, they're part of our crew of Finishing Move. We all just kind of discussed like, all right, let's do a demo for this, but like, we need to take our own approach, and so we sort of figured out, like we knew it was obviously for Doom: The Dark Ages. We had a couple of pictures of like concept art and so it's like, okay, let's take this to sort of, an older version of metal, like kind of like back in the original Doom, where it was the influence of music at the time, the like early 90s thrash metal.
Right.
So sort of because it's a prequel, so we can go back in time instead of it being like this more modern industrial metal as the focus. Like let's focus on older styles of metal, thrash metal, power metal, groove metal, and then also these sort of ancient type of sounds, because in the imagery it had the Doomslayer with the like mace and his fur cape, and so it's like, okay, we want that kind of sound too. And
like more cinematic, sort of like kind of like, more that cinematic, kind of Conan the Barbarian kind of crazy, like, because the imagery was a lot like he was wearing like a fur cape and it had like a lot of that. So we're like, okay, we formed this idea of like, okay, well, we can't sound like Mick. That's just not like, we just decided that that's not going to work because, like there's a million other people that are good at being We Have Mick at Home. And, like we just didn't want, to do that.
That's
like
the perfect description though, because he's so singularly good at what he does. I remember I was in the room at his like famous GDC talk about Doom 2016. And it's the only time
so are we.
I was, I love it. We're just perpetually, it's like Forrest Gump. We can find each other in the background of all these photos of each other's photos. I think literally the only time I've been to GDC 1,000 times and been to a lot of talks. And it's the only time I ever felt like my jaw was kind of just permanently on the floor the whole time. And I kept thinking, I rarely feel like I've just learned an hour's worth of an onslaught of new information. Normally, best case scenario, once you've been in it a while, is, oh, that was cool. I'll have to remember that. That was a neat trick. And then 20 minutes later, someone says a thing again. Oh, yeah, that's a clever way to solve that problem I hadn't thought about before. And it's cool and it's interesting, but you don't walk away just feeling like you've had an entire, college education in an hour. But I remember feeling that way at his, where it just felt like one inventive, brilliant idea after another, and I was so blown away. So yeah, I think it's the perfect description. We have that at home. It not anybody can just, like, I was talking about this total tangent, but I was talking about Andor recently with somebody. I don't know if you've watched it, but it's the most brilliant thing ever made. And I saw like people online going, okay, Disney, you see what Tony Gilroy and co made here, more of this. And I thought, the thing is, you can't just ask for more. It's so dependent on the exact people who made it. It's so specific to their interest and their talent. It's not just about the aesthetic or the choice of subject matter. It's like that person has to be the one if that's the specific thing you want. And it's that you're just not going to duplicate that. And so it will at best be we have that at home. The discount fucking name, like generic Kroger version, and it's just never going to be the same. So you're so wise to just fully take that off the menu straight out of the gate.
Yeah. So like that, basically we decided, okay, we're going to go old school prequel. We're going to do, because it had to be metal. That wasn't, there was no, it wasn't going to like not be a metal influenced score. Like that was still like, this is, because you go back to like Bobby Prince and the, Doom 1 and 2, it's, that was metal, MIDI metal, but it was,
dude, but it's still so, I mean, every time you find
rips.
one of the little toys and you hear that little taste of, and was it one of them? I remember one of them, what you could like go into, or am I confusing it with Wolfenstein, where it like triggered the old actual original game and you could play it as like a mini game within the game. Pretty sure that was in one of the recent Wolfenstein. It's like a different mic. Old but it's the same thing where there's like this iconic fragment that was done and it's clearly metal in its gesture, even though it's
MIDI,
it doesn't sound at all like with the in its production, as it were. So but anyway, continue.
No, so basically, like, we knew it was going to be metal. We just sort of decided, okay, but it's not going to be sort of like that specific kind of flavor that was in 2016 or Eternal kind of thing, because that had been done and it had been done to just the most immaculate level. And so we were like, we're moving on. We're going to do kind of like old school with a bunch of inspiration from kind of like medieval sounds and times and kind of a more cinematic vibe. And we actually did 4 pieces for our pitch, even though we were asked to just do 1 minute piece. I shouldn't give up this secret, but you can kind of always do a little bit more.
But I can tell you, I've pitched on projects before where I did similarly. I way over delivered and I still didn't get the job because I was, apropos we were saying a minute ago, I still was kind of choosing a weird novel angle, knowing they may or may not like it. So it's one of those that even though you did more, you clearly got the job because it was the right and more. It wasn't just more, and like, so you wouldn't have landed it on just brownie teacher's pet points alone. You know what I mean?
No. And we were specific about kind of like, we did some different, like, cause we weren't sure what they wanted and we weren't sure what we wanted. And so we kind of did like a few flavors of ice cream, like within this kind of like, fence post of what we had decided. Some were more kind of like swagger metal, and then one was like very cinematic and very almost kind of just like you would find in like a Marvel movie or something like that kind of thing. And even though like we didn't use any of the pitch pieces, they didn't actually make it into the score, which is that's pretty common. You kind of like, you have this early development where you kind of really figure out what you're doing. But it's just this one kind of like very cinematic piece we did that Hugo was like, this is the game that I want to make. Like, I don't want to repeat games. That's like, Hugo's very big on like, he's the lead creative at id. And he's like, basically he is modern day Doom. He's kind of like the visionary, and he doesn't like making the same game twice. So like 2016 is different than Eternal, and Eternal has different mechanics than Dark Ages. And he's very much like,
they really committed to that. I mean, every review, every player, every Steam review are all, like the pacing of the game is so different, and it's almost borderline open world in a bunch of spots. That's like, again, very different way of approaching a game like this. They deserve major credit for that, because when a franchise reaches a certain size, the risk taking tends to start to vanish. And
and
that is not the case here.
No, Hugo is like, talk about just like an amazing creative, first of all, and a visionary, and like just a rock with his vision. And especially in like what you're saying is like, could be potentially dangerous. It could be, it's a big franchise. Are people going to be mad? And he always takes this like, they're always mad for a little while. They always come around, and like this, it's like it takes them
good. Yeah, absolutely.
a month or two. And that really helped us like feel confident, because, I think contrary to a lot of people's beliefs about kind of like how composing works is like, it's a big collaboration with the creative stakeholders, and like their vision is like, it really influences like what you're going to bring to the table. Like, yeah, like we're creative, we're actually doing the writing, but like they're giving us kind of like, what I like to call it, it's like the fence posts that kind of mark our playground, or our sandbox of like, this is kind of like, you guys can like build sandcastles and do whatever the fuck you want in this little box here and be crazy. But like, here's kind of what we're, like, this is what we hired you for. And I think just like having his vision be so clear, like, that is so helpful. Like in terms of like, he was always just like super supportive, but always very clear and like, okay, this needs to be like this. Let's try more of this. And just having like the lead creative, like in your meetings about music was like, that was crazy because that's
he was
uncommon.
He was in our meetings every
like
single
weekly
time.
stand-ups, like
the
just
weekly
having
meeting.
the lead guy.
I don't think
that's very unusual.
I don't think we've experienced that on any other project. Like usually the lead creative, they might like one time kind of like introduce themselves. And then other than that, you're kind of dealing with the audio director, and then they're sort of sending it up the chain every once in a while, or they're making the decisions on it. And Hugo was in every single just weekly boring meeting, with like,
you guys are pretty boring. So I get that.
Truth.
Doing that.
I mean, it's music is so important to the game. It honestly makes sense. It's awesome that just in the scope of what undoubtedly his responsibilities were, it would have been easy to not make time for it, even despite knowing the importance of music, just because there's a lot of mouths to feed, a lot of fires to be putting out, all that kind of stuff. Normal game dev just demands this whole point of having delegated directors to audio directors and a cinematics director, and that's kind of the whole reason for that structure. But still, it is pretty cool to hear that was baked into the process, because and honestly it shows that it makes sense. And music, especially, I was hoping to beat the game before we chatted. I made it about 2/3 of the way through it before my own schedule sort of ate me alive a little bit, but it's really integrated into the rhythm of the gameplay, like the kind of rise and fall. It's not just locational, and it's also not just like bad guys have spawned, cue the drums, like it really feels like it has a really organic flow to it, that it's almost like there's just kind of a record playing that in that sort of Wizard of Oz, Dark Side of the Moon, like I'm just sort of magically timing it to the gameplay, which is pretty awesome, because I think the risk with a thing like this is that because it calls out for such a wall of sound, like ferocious metal vibe, that it's easy to become monotonous as a result, and it really isn't. It's actually really, it's got huge dynamic range, and I can only imagine that comes from being so interwoven. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm so glad you appreciate the dynamic range, because that's actually kind of like some of the like, why isn't it just loud all the time, like kind of thing. Like that was some of the early critique, like why isn't it just like a rock concert all the time? And it's like, that's not the game Hugo wanted to make. then that wasn't the score that we were making. Like it was a conscious choice, like whether someone ended up liking it or not, like it was a conscious choice to do, we're going to do a cinematic style. It's going to kind of like follow you and mirror kind of like this bigger world where there is larger spaces.
Oh yeah,
You're
and the
kind of
game
going
incentivizes
between
you to backtrack in an almost
Yeah.
Metroidvania style way.
Yep.
It's like, oh, you finally have that key for that door you passed 20 minutes ago, and there's actually good reason to go back. There's like material gameplay mechanics type reasons to go back, and it exposes so much music that if you're just in mayhem all the time, there's one bit where I was like, am I hearing a harmonica? I would hear this kind of like pitch bendy thing during those quieter moments that I loved that. It again, it's that, oh, they're not afraid, you and they id, to make a thing that's drawing distinctive lines from its predecessors. They're not, you're not victims of its own success in that way, and kind of refusing to change.
It's no, I'm glad that you got that experience. I certainly, like when I play it, I get this experience, like super, like this cinematic, and like and hearing it all come together, like especially like there's the level where I just really like how the integration and the implementation came together. It was like the first time you ride the dragon, like the pacing, the sort of propulsion of that going between the dragon and sort of back to foot and that kind of thing. It like, it's like this sci-fi fantasy kind of craziness. And then it all like breaks out into like huge metal, like drops when you're like fighting dudes, like big riffs, like come in. And yeah, we really wanted to kind of like play with the juxtaposition of like, when the heavy hits, that's a heavy moment, but it's not always going to be heavy. There's going to be moments that are a little bit more quiet or a little bit more tense. And again, dynamic was kind of like the big thing that Hugo like really wanted to push for, just because it's a more grounded experience. You're not flying around as much. You're more kind of tank centric. You're not a Ferrari. You're more like a Sherman tank. You're kind of like attacking people. Stand and fight is the kind of like, it's not a game where you hide or you don't do a lot of like running from the enemy. You kind of are encouraged to just bash them and straight go at it. And so like we were trying to capture that, along with, again, like it's a medieval Doom, so like we wanted to kind of bring those, like what could we do to kind of bring kind of like medieval elements. So we used a lot of kind of like cool folk instruments, like the tagelharpa and bass tagelharpa, playing cello in really weird ways, like to get it to kind of do cool textural stuff. We have a bunch of custom built instruments that we've made over the years that we use to do sound design and stuff with. But yeah, we kind of like did a deep dive on like what are some of the things that we could do. We've kind of identified this kind of like old school riff metal. We still wanted to have like modern mixes, modern drums, modern detunings, but then like, how do we bring the medieval stuff? And that's really where sort of the orchestral stuff came in, and a lot of the like folk instrumentation, to kind of give it that like rough kind of like, I always like to say like a hairy beard to the sound. It's the fur cape on the Slayer, like that's
it's almost Viking-ish. Is the out of curiosity, how clear was all of that you're describing early on? Sometimes I've worked on projects where you're on it for a few years, and then there's like a creative epiphany halfway through where it requires a bit of a course correct. Obviously you have the broad wind direction of knowing it's sort of metal something within the many subsets of what metal can be, but like you said, you kind of know those general fence posts, but there's still a lot of room for potential course correct in the midst of all that to go, oh, actually, like that cinematic quality that we like we were initially like that way less of that, or of course you said it was in your demo, but yeah, just as an example, like did you have any of those kind of big picture, oh, we suddenly realize what this is?
Yeah, no,
I
no, I
was
was
just
going
going
to
to
say,
say
yeah, go ahead.
that
You can
Get
talk.
along, stop fighting.
It was definitely a process. It started, I think, where it was a lot of just metal focused, and then there were some pivots more into the cinematic direction, and then ultimately it landed like more in the middle, more towards metal. You know what I mean? I don't like Brian. Don't you agree? It's sort of like that was the
Yeah,
flow that it took.
It's like
Yeah.
there and back again ish.
we definitely like we explored kind of like the full range of the sandbox, if you will, in terms of like how dynamic, how cinematic are we going to make this? Are some, because like there were we kind of started and we had some like early wins and like, okay, this is good map music. It's got a kind of good balance. And then, like Hugo was like, well, what if we just like really push this towards this kind of like, crazy Marvel movie kind of cinematic kind of vibe. And we explored that. And then kind of like did some pieces like that. But then we ultimately, we came back to those pieces and we did additional minutes for that to like kind of like, okay, we need to still be metal. It was kind of like, so there was this like ebb and flow where we, like there was like a couple of cues that we got like really cinematic. There was like no guitars in even like it went like totally like pulsing orchestral, drums kind of thing. And you still have those moments. It's just like what you were saying, this is a 3-year process. So like we learned a lot of stuff on the way, so like by about, like a year and a half in too, we had dialed in, okay, like this is the recipe. And this is kind of like where everything needs to kind of like ramp up to and lead up to. And so, yeah, we did go backtrack to some earlier stuff and write new stuff over the top of it and kind of add like augment cues to kind of like, essentially get to where we ended up, like, and still kind of like make a coherent, so that everything kind of fit together. But yeah, it was definitely like, it wasn't like we just like came in day one, had the sound that just worked, and then we went from there. It was definitely like we spent like a good 6 months to a year like trying stuff, having some wins, having some stuff that like was really cool, but just like once the level kind of came, how it goes, like you start play testing and you're like, okay, like I think we need more
right
of this intensity level or that intensity level. And like there was definitely some like, you know, how it is when you develop like, let's say like a music system, like whether it's like a combat system or an explore system and stuff like that, you'll have these ideas about like, here's all the energy layers that a player is going to experience. And it's like all well and good. You conceptualize that, you mock it up in Wise and you figure it out. And then the actual game becomes playable and you start playing and you're like, oh man, you know what? We actually like between 1 and 2, we kind of need a 1.5, to bridge this and like make it, kind of propel. And so you go back and you're like, like it's pretty we don't get mad because we've just done it so many times. Like, it's like, yeah, you go back and like, okay, we'll add some, propulsion to the ambient cues, or yeah, we need another layer that lives between here and here that we thought we didn't need, but we actually need a lot of that, like that kind of stuff happens all the time. And because obviously
I love
we
that
have to
part
be
of the process. To me,
yeah,
figuring out what it actually is really exciting. It's in graduating beyond the kind of whiteboard abstraction of it.
I think that's the coolest thing about making games, and that's what makes it so interesting. Because like with film, it's like hopefully you have locked picture, or at least you know what the story is going to be, and stuff might get cut or reconformed, but it is what it is. Where the game, it's like there's that experience of you can conceptualize it all you want until you get in and play it, and it's like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is totally different. I'm spending way more time here in this section. I'm spending way less time here. How many times like with a game have you, let's say you've written a ton of cool music, you're at 5-10 minutes of music for an area, and it's like, oh man, these themes are so cool. And then ultimately like the game ships and it's like someone spends 20 seconds there and you're like, oh man, like you should go stand over there for a while.
You need to just go there and hang out for a bit. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to convince the team to make an achievement. Stand here and don't move for 45 seconds.
To hear the full, to hear the full theme statement. Yeah. Just like but it's just, I mean, that's just like kind of like what's exciting about, making interactive music is we're trying to make it feel like what you were saying. Like, it's almost like it's like the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. You're like synced up. Like,
it should always.
We
feel
want
like
you to feel like it's like, dude, is this like precogging
just
what
reading my mind? Yeah.
Exactly. But we kind of have to cheat that, right? We have to like use kind of sleight of hand to kind of like, in a way, I'll kind of like fake the two picture aspect. And I always think that challenge is like, it's cool because it's never ending. Once you think you're like, man, I've done so many of these, like I know exactly how to get in and get out of this gameplay and that gameplay. But it's like every game is new. Like every game presents a new interactive challenge that you need to solve for, even if you're still using all of the same, like your toolkit that you've developed over years and years and years, that doesn't go away. But it's like, it's never really like, like a film or a show. It's like, okay, I don't know how to score this. Like, let's go. Like, there's always that like, damn, dude, like, I don't know how to make this work. How are we going to make this work? Kind of.
That's where the magic comes from too. I remember once talking to someone about the composer Jerry Goldsmith, and I remember saying he all the way through to the end of his life, age 75, he was writing scores that were so innovative and interesting and full of unexpected choices. And the way I remember the way I described it, kind of off the cuff in that moment, it taps into what you just said, where I was like, you know what? It almost feels like every project he was writing in that teenage, I don't know what I'm doing way, that leads you to do cool stuff because you're not falling back on these well-honed muscles, that these kind of tried and true formulas that, while they're very reliable, they also may make things kind of stale because, this is the 90th time you've done a piece like this. When you somehow always seem like you don't know what you're doing, it sparks something. And yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the magical things about games is they seem to impose that on us, whether we like it or not, because you could literally score a sequel to a game that you did previously, and it's full of new stuff that's just going to invariably throw you for a loop, or even just the tools have evolved because technology is perpetually improved. Just Wise may have gotten an update that suddenly has all these new features that make this thing easier or that thing harder, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like, even if you're trying to do it the same way, it might not even be possible.
And different studios have different tech. I mean, there's times where, you can't even just assume that what you did in another game from a technical standpoint, from a programming standpoint, is always going to be a resource that you can tap into in another game for a variety of reasons. It could be just like, hey, we just don't have the tech, like, or we're not using Wise, we're just using Unreal or something like that. And so we can't do this unless we pay a programmer, which we don't have, like to get it. And so then you're coming up with creative solutions that, again, it's like your brain is going, it's like, okay, so I can't do it how I did it this last time because like we don't have that tech, or we don't have the, there's not the time or the budget to like get that tech. So how, you're kind of like, here's my pantry, like these are ingredients that I have to work with interactively. Like, how can I make this as cool as possible? And also just like not, like get over your skis, where like sometimes I think what can happen is when you get too many possibilities, like you get kind of like the weird generative systems that like stop being musical, you know, and you always like have to go back to like, oh man, we still gotta like be musical and have themes and like stuff.
You're preaching to the choir. As someone deeply obsessed with highly reactive, interactive music, there's a definite sweet spot where, you know, I always say, you know, those like websites that have cute kind of step sequencers that you can kind of move little graphics around and it makes kind of a simple little grid based thing. Like that's a toy and it's fun. And especially if you don't have an outlet for music, it might be really kind of cool. And yes, it's also super interactive. Every little thing you touch changes the music. So on some sense, it's the golden idol of what we're supposedly doing, except that it's so not. What you just said is so true. You know, the records that moved you, that made you want to be musicians, are obviously very fixed in time, very linear. And so you go, how do we capture that? But somehow make the player an author in their own version of it in real time in a game. That's that magic thing that we're all chasing. Each time you step up at bat and you swing, we get a little closer. But it's like the horizon. We're just going to kind of all of us in this field are collectively moving to that horizon. I don't know if we'll ever at some point all look around and go, oh, that person, they've solved the art form. We should all do something different with our life. Like I suspect that's not possible.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just, you know, but yeah, I definitely resonate with that.
I think it's just that, you know, it's finding the right balance where you can keep the intention of the music, but
100%.
then, you know, like, because there's a point of granularity where it just falls apart. You know, it's too atomized, and I think the intention is lost. And so it's like finding that sweet spot where it can be recombined and it, you know, you can maximize like the experience and how the music works, but it's not so chopped up into like little bits that you lose that sense of like, just this is a coherent piece of music that has a coherent direction to it, you know?
Well, I feel what you delivered very much sort of practices what you're preaching, because it really it felt very dynamic and very smooth. And you know, and what I liked is that there's definitely a bunch of moments where you can very clearly clock the state change or whatever that is bringing new music. But it felt like, you know, when you're at a concert and a song is winding down and then they just start on that riff of like, oh, you know, everybody knows this one, and this energy gets injected into it. That, in other words, smooth hidden transitions are not always actually the right choice. Sometimes it's really cool, especially for a game like this and an aesthetic like this, to kind of drop that gauntlet and say, we are announcing a change in a super unsubtle way. And you kind of, it seemed to very tastefully know when was the right times to kind of sneak in versus other times that it really, you know, it's like I've been to Metallica shows where the fucking pyrotechnics just suddenly explode off the stage, and it's very unsubtle and quite fun. And yeah, so I honestly, it's really impressive because, as I said, you had a very arguably unenviable situation to step into, a very iconic score, a franchise with very iconic scores, and one of those that really invites a lot of opinion from everyone. And you know, to give you another, you know, to give you credit beyond all the things that I feel strongly about and what you achieve musically, I think there's a courage in stepping into that as well. Just knowing, you know, there's going to be a lot of people that no matter what we do, it's not going to, you know, change is not good and they're not going to like it. And to just embrace that, you know, I think a lot of people would have weighed taking the job, uh, just knowing the broader context, you know.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's a tricky one. And so, you know, props to you for just leaning in, you know, and going, we're just gonna try to add our own thing. And yeah, I think you basically did the best possible version of what I could really imagine anybody doing in this
Thank you.
situation.
Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
I mean,
I mean,
think,
that's
go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, that's kind of how we approached it. We're just like, we're just gonna have to full send this because, like, there's people, no matter what, there's gonna be people that like wish us dead, So it's like we just have to like full send and like do the best that we can do and try to be really proud of, like, make a score that we're proud of and that it is proud of, and sort of like, at the end of the day, I always say it's like we're composers, we're a B2B business. Like we're there for our clients. We're really trying to, like they're who hires us, and they direct us and shepherd us, and like, yeah, we want to make a great game for the fans. Ultimately, like, we work for a studio, and I think that it helped that they had like a really clear vision, and we were just like, hey, we're going to do something that makes you proud and us proud, and like, fuck the haters, basically.
Yeah, what
I
else?
mean,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is in the same boat and had to obviously just embrace the same mentality, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, it takes courage, like, just outside of games, just any music, to just, it takes the vulnerability to do anything that is going to connect with people. You're going to take some risk, and some people if you can do something that you like, that, and you hold yourself to a high standard, there's going to be some other group of people out there that like it, and there's going to be also probably people that hate it. But it doesn't matter. It's like you have to have the courage and the vulnerability to make something that means something to you. And I think that's for us, that it's like, are we happy with it? Is it happy with it? Like, those are our goals. And knowing that, like, there's going to be, like, if we do something good that we like, there's gonna be plenty of people out there that like it. And then no matter what we do, like, whether it, like, literally it's the best thing that's ever been made, there's gonna be people that are like, this sucks.
Yep.
So, just to not worry about that, like, that's not a factor. That's not even in our mind at all, of like, oh, well, is this going to upset people? Is this not the right thing that everyone's going to, it's like, once you start going down that what if, questioning, your own judgments and your own thoughts on it, there's nothing you can do that's, like, I think that's going to be right. So you just, you have to follow what is true to you. And yeah, I think that's like, so it was definitely, we knew we knew that there would be people that no matter what we did, that we're going to dislike it. And fortunately, knowing that, we're able to be like, okay, like, let's just do what we think is going to be great for this, and what id wants, and where we can meet both of those. And
And
we're
thankfully,
really
a lot
proud
of people like it. A lot of people
Yes,
like
yeah.
it. That's the thing. Like,
that's the great part. Yeah.
I mean,
I
well,
see the streaming numbers.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And absolutely, because it's one of those where um it's interesting, because it's not like sometimes there's projects where a brand has kind of run its course, and so the haters would be like the kind of those like hangers on who are committed to like this old way, or a weird nostalgia from when they were young. This isn't that. This is obviously those scores are as definitionally iconic as game music gets. I mean, it's like people love it for very good reason. It and righteously so. So you're not it's like you can presumably kind of on some level appreciate the hater, like why you can kind of get where they're coming from, because
Sure.
it's a thing that is understandably loved, which just makes it all the more kind of complicated and confusing to step into. So just all the more praise for
to tie that back to tie it back to Metallica as an analogy.
I love
it's
it.
kind of
Bring us in for the landing. You're gonna close us out.
the real like metal people, it was like, Metallica's Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Master of Puppets, and Justice for All. That's like the real Metallica. But then the Black Album came out, and it's like, oh, that's the sellout, whatever. But that's the entry point for a lot of people too, where they really got to the next level. And so for me, I was like, okay, well, the Black Album is cool and all the prior ones, but then they do Load and Load 2. And I'm like, oh, these are trash. And that's where I sort of like went off the train. But like still their career from there goes like, it's still going exponential and continues exponential. And a lot of people load, and Load 2 is the entry point. And then they keep going, and Saint Anger or whatever is next. And it's like, and people are like, it's there's always going to be people that are like joining the train at different points, and people that like pine for the previous era before they changed, including myself. So we totally understand that like any kind of change, and not just music, but just in the gameplay, like even where it's different in each of the modern Doom games, people are going to be upset about that, and then other people are going to join on, and that's like they love it. And then there's some people that are fans from the beginning, and they love the changes, so it's part of how change happens. Is things are different, and it's going to piss some people off, and other people are going to absolutely love it. And we're proud to just be a part of that, of something that is actually like a really cool game, and an amazing franchise. And yeah, it's amazing to be a part of it.
And what I'll add, I think the cool thing about Doom specifically, from a game and a music standpoint, is that the music is so iconic across the franchise, from the early days, the Bobby Prince stuff, through the Mick Gordon and on into like, hopefully, now the Dark Ages, that everybody has that kind of like entry point. Like for us, like it was the original Doom. Like that's where like those were some of the first like actual real games we played on PC. It came out like in '93. I was 12 years old and probably shouldn't have been playing it, but definitely was. And so like that kind of like the cool thing about that is like that introduced a lot of people to kind of like metal music, even if it was in MIDI. And I think it encouraged people to kind of go discover stuff that was inspiring the composer at the time. And I think the same is true with 2016 and Eternal. I think you've got people that like got exposed to heavy music for the first time and became fans of heavy music from a video game. And like hopefully there's young kids, maybe not too young, let's say, that are playing Dark Ages. That's their first Doom experience. Maybe that encourages them to like, hey, I want to go check out, like, where was this inspired by? I want to go check out some heavy music, like some bands, and like and kind of like become a fan of the genre. And I think that just like to bring the conversation full circle, I think that's one of the coolest things about games now, is that like it's a lot of people's first touch point with music, and their musical taste gets formed off of games. And so like I think we have a huge responsibility, and I take a lot of pride in that our work is for a lot of people, that is their either first or main experience with the art of music, and that it inspires them to go on and either listen to more game music, but hopefully like just
Other
music like go listen to music and be a fan of music. And I think in an era where attention spans are so short and everything's 30 seconds, a minute kind of TikTok, I think games is one of the last places where you will sit and experience music for hours at a time and really absorb it, sort of how we used to absorb it, just, listening to records in the car or just at home. And so you're listening to these themes over and over and over again. And you're really like, you're rinsing it, man. You're letting it soak in a way that just nothing else is soaking in that much anymore in the attention economy. And so, yeah, I mean, like, I feel like we have like a huge torch to carry, like for music in general, like as game composers, because that's where people
basically
are spending
the
their
future
time.
Of civilization.
We're the future of civilization, is all I'm saying. So
fair. Well, on that wonderfully humble note for us to all collectively agree on, I love it. I love it. I agree with everything you were saying. And again, congrats. Thanks for giving me so much of your time. And really, really awesome to see. It always makes me happy to see good folks with a lot of talent take a bite out of a big giant, monstrous apple and totally crush it. So congrats again. And
thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah,
congrats on Towerborn. Like that. I know you've been working on that for a while. So that's,
that was fun.
Awesome.
That was a good time.
Cool.
So yeah, thanks guys.
Yeah.
Cool. Great.
Thanks a lot.